On the night between October 8th and 9th, 2025, somewhere over Volgograd Oblast, Russia's power watchers didn't notice anything unusual. The gas lines were working, pipelines in place, and a cold wind swept over industrial complexes that served the energy heart of the south. But somewhere in that calm, Ukraine's deep strike units were already moving. By 2:17 a.m., drones launched in silence. Their mission: hit two critical energy nodes deep in Russian territory. First, the Lukoil Korobkovsky gas processing plant in Kotovo and the Yefimovka dispatch station, a hub feeding trunk gas pipelines across the region. These weren't secondary sites. The first processed hundreds of millions of cubic meters of gas. The second controlled flow across major pipeline arteries. If you disrupt either, you don't just black out units, you choke the war economy itself. Moments after launch, remote terminals in Kyiv showed the drones converging. At 3:02 a.m., explosions tore through Korobkovsky's gas processing units. Fire bloomed, pipelines burst, and valves blew outward. A few minutes later, at 3:06 a.m., Yefimovka's control circuits blew. Network lines glitched, and gas pressure surged in ruptured segments. The local alarms flashed, and emergency valves snapped shut. These strikes were not crimes of confusion. They were pre-planned moves in a deeper strategy. Cut the flow, slow the machine, force Moscow to scramble. Russia's social media was filled with shock. State officials scrambled to deny the damage. But in those moments of flame and cracked infrastructure, the battlefield shifted, not by force of armies, but by bits of steel, flame, and timing. But the question isn't just that Ukraine hit those plants, it's how they pulled it off so far behind enemy lines, what tools and tactics they used, how Russia tried to stop them, and what comes next when your pipelines become targets. Let me walk you through the operation, minute by minute, sensor by sensor, so you can see how Ukraine turned gas into a weapon and pressure into power. At 10:30 p.m. the night before, intelligence teams in Kyiv began painting the target picture. Satellite imagery, pipeline maps, leaked infrastructure diagrams, and open-source observers gave outlines of Korobkovsky and Yefimovka, compressor units, control rooms, inlet valves, regulators, metering sets, and power feed lines. Analysts identified weak points that included vulnerable pipelines, control stations close to access roads, and redundant pipelines that could be choked by a single valve failure. The aim was to maximize disruption while minimizing collateral destruction. Between 11:15 p.m. and midnight, communications nodes and SIGINT ears were primed. Observers listened for traffic in local control frequencies, pipeline monitoring uplinks, and SCADA telemetry chatter. They tracked when controls were active, when valves were being tested, and which maintenance windows left segments exposed. At the same time, human sources in the region were activated. Local contacts reported recent activity, truck runs, nighttime deliveries, and crew shifts at the plants. By 12:45, the detailed strike plan was ready. It included approach corridors, altitudes, contingency routes, abort triggers, backup targets, and timing windows. A legal and collateral damage team ran models. How far explosion damage could reach, which neighborhoods might be affected, and which segments of the pipeline could reroute around damage. That constrained the warhead loads and approach angles. At 1:25 a.m., drones began rolling from hidden pads deep inside Ukrainian-controlled territory. Winged long-range drones with high-efficiency propulsion took off first, climbing slowly under radar cover. A second wave, consisting of FPV multi-rotors and shorter-range strike drones, launched from forward dispersed kennels. Launch dispersal prevented easy detection and attack on the ground. As the drones climbed, they followed waypoints calculated to skirt major radar nets, S-300, S-400, and avoid surveillance overlap zones. Their flight plan favored terrain masking, which was by now a routine for Ukraine's jets. They were used to flying behind ridgelines, valleys, or industrial structures where radar shadows existed. Some segments were timed to coincide with radar sweep gaps, using known refresh intervals, so the drones would slip in unseen. Navigation was a multi-layered system. When GNSS satellite navigation signals faded or were jammed, inertial systems kept the drones on path. Barometric altimeters controlled altitude in blind patches. Optical flow, camera-based motion tracking, aided terminal alignment near structures so the drones didn't drift. Pilots monitored telemetry and held manual control authority if the onboard systems faltered. By 2:45 a.m., the strike groups entered Volgograd airspace. Their speed slowed, altitude decreased, and they began final alignment. The winged drones carried disruption warheads meant to rupture gas lines or crater compressor modules. FPV drones carried smaller charges, klaxons, or collision payloads to blow meters, control boxes, and local power nodes. At 2:58 a.m., the seekers aboard the drones activated. Visual templates preloaded stored images of Korobkovsky's layout, compressor modules, pipe arrangements, and control rooms. Infrared sensors looked for heat signatures such as hot valves, active compressors, and flow heaters. The drones matched what they saw in real time to their map overlays. That allowed them to lock precisely onto control nodes, not just generic buildings. Simultaneously, the FPVs spread out toward peripheral infrastructure, electrical feed stations, valve control kiosks, generator pods, and telemetry houses. Disabling those made responding slower, damaged backup controls, and increased chaos for plant staff. At 3:02 a.m., the first strike landed at Korobkovsky. A winged drone impacted a compression module feed line. The rupture spray ignited associated gas, triggering cascading explosions. Valves blew, pipelines fractured, and storage tanks vented. Secondary detonations jolted through the plant. The fire spread across compressor stations, piping, and control enclosures. Moments later, FPVs struck in tandem. One crashed into an electrical feed compound, knocking out power to backup systems. Another hit a control kiosk and destroyed SCADA routers. Those hits magnified the impact. Employees could not easily isolate damage, restart systems, or seal flow paths. Then, at 3:06 a.m., Yefimovka came under assault. The strike drone breached a critical regulator segment. Pressure surged, and pipelines surged. The dispatch station's control machinery failed. Metering and flow valves locked or dumped pressure. The web of lines feeding Kuibyshev-Tikhoretsk, Zhirinovsk Volgograd, and Saratov-Kuzmichi saw immediate fluctuations. Throughout these moments, Russian air defenses scrambled. Local radar posts pinged anomalies. Pantsir and short-range systems attempted local interception, while S-300 batteries tried to engage at a higher altitude. Interceptors launched. Missile trails streaked through the sky. A few FPVs got clipped. A winged drone narrowly dodged a volley. But by then, much of the damage had already been done. As explosions echoed and flames lit the horizon, plant workers scrambled. Fire suppression systems triggered but were overwhelmed. Control rooms lost power, valves jammed. Control logic warped by blast interference. Some segments of the pipeline automatically shut off, while others exploded mid-flow. Backup teams tried to re-establish control, but roads were blocked by debris. Pipelines had ruptured, and power nodes were gone. Emergency staff risked secondary detonations from residual gas stockpiles. Access was limited. Fire trucks from nearby towns responded, but could only encircle the burns. Some corridors remained lethal. In parallel, near Feodosia in Crimea, damage to the oil terminal amplified the pain. Fuel tanks exploded. Ruptured lines cut, and valving storage racks were disabled. The knock-on effect, fuel flow into Russian logistics trains slowed abruptly. That disrupted refueling to forward units and stoked shortages. By 4:30 a.m., Kiev's intelligence center began forensics. Analysts downloaded thermal scans, cross-referenced local social media posts showing fire and damage, geolocated drone clips, and started mapping which components actually failed. They compared expected hit points to real damage, traced broken power lines and control cables, and assessed what secondary explosions had destroyed beyond initial strikes. Early reports concluded that compressor modules, pressure regulators, metering systems, and meter loops were heavily damaged. The gutting of control systems and backup stations meant restoration would be slow. Local pipelines had cracks, flanges blown open, and infrastructure near control rooms severely compromised. Within hours, Russia's leadership scrambled into action. Officials denied any core damage, insisting that the facilities remained intact. Moscow claimed air defenses had downed multiple drones. Propaganda wings bragged that the strikes were attacks on civilian infrastructure, contrary to observed industrial damage. State media urged closure, retaliation, and increased protection for gas and energy systems. By dawn, gas flow was disrupted. The surcharge on backup lines caused delivery shortages to several regions. Upstream and downstream customers, power plants, industry, and civilian heating felt the damage. Logisticians rerouted supplies, tapped reserve stocks, and stretched margins. Every hour of delay translates into energy loss, economic war cost, and pressure on Moscow's rear lines. In the following days, Russian field commanders reported fuel rationing, delayed ammunition salvage, and stress on supply trains, especially in southern sectors. Maintenance crews raced to isolate damage, patch broken valves, and bypass circuits. But with key control systems wrecked, those fixes were fragile and only partial. Ukraine touted the strike as a success. The Special Operations Forces press office confirmed both facilities were hit, and the General Staff said explosions were recorded. The statement framed these hits as vital to limiting Russia's war capacity. Social media and Western media ran headlines like "Ukraine strikes Russian energy backbone." Analysts pointed out, a blow on gas and pipeline nodes is more than energy warfare. It's a war on war. Russia, in turn, accelerated hardening and decentralization. New power nodes were dispersed, critical systems were cloaked, anti-air defenses reorganized. Some officials ordered relocation of pipeline control centers away from vulnerable hubs, and new mobile protection units were deployed. From the operation, several clear lessons came. First, integrated intelligence wins. Satellite imagery, SIGINT, HUMINT, and drone reconnaissance were fused into a coherent targeting map that reduced guesswork. Second, the mixed drone doctrine worked. Winged drones struck heavy targets. FPVs disabled support systems and created chaos. Third, redundancy in navigation mattered. The drone's ability to operate through GPS denial zones meant that Russian jamming had limited effect. Fourth, timing and route design saved the mission. By threading corridors and staggering arrival vectors, defenders could not mount an effective counterattack. Fifth, damage to control nodes extends the disruption. Hitting valves, control cabins, and power feeds lengthened the time repair teams needed to restore function. Finally, the psychological effect stayed for a long time. For Ukraine, it was proof that deep targets were no longer safe. For Russia, it exposed vulnerability in systems many assumed were behind multiple layers of defense. The battlefield had now expanded into infrastructure and energy. In the hours after the explosions, Russia's silence said a lot. Satellite pictures showed what the officials wouldn't admit. Both the Korobkovsky plant and Yefimovka station were severely hit. Pipelines were cracked open, control rooms burned out, and power systems melted down. Engineers who arrived to check the sites found valves torn apart and control wires completely destroyed. Fixing that kind of damage wasn't a matter of hours or even days. It would take weeks, maybe longer. Across the region, gas pressure started dropping. Factories, power stations, and local utilities began to report shortages. To keep the system running, Russia had to reroute gas from other lines, cut industrial use, and slow down exports. Each workaround added cost, time, and chaos, exactly what Ukraine wanted. Within 24 hours, Moscow went into defensive mode. State TV downplayed the damage, calling it minor. But behind the scenes, the government sent soldiers to guard more pipelines, moved mobile air defense units closer to refineries, and ordered engineers to start emergency repairs. Officials even discussed building parts of the energy grid underground to protect them from future attacks. In Kiev, analysts watched closely. They mapped how fast repairs were happening, how Russia was reacting, and what weaknesses remained. Every move Russia made provided Ukraine with more data and ideas for the next operation. This strike changed the rules. It showed that Ukraine could hit Russia not just on the battlefield, but deep inside its energy heart. Gas, power, and pressure all could now be turned into weapons. By sunrise, the fires at Korobkovsky and Yefimovka were still burning. Smoke rolled across the horizon, reminding the world that even the safest parts of Russia were no longer secure. For Ukraine, it was a quiet victory that spoke louder than any speech. For Russia, it was a warning written in flame. Your pipelines can burn, your power can fall, and the next target might already be flying. And as the smoke drifted east, one question hung over the war. If Ukraine could strike this deep once, what's stopping them from doing it again?